Are you a new or aspiring game developer in search of advice? You've come to the right place. Over the years, we've been fortunate enough to grow a thriving game dev community and witness a lot of inspiring game dev stories. We've also had the opportunity to speak with many bright minds in the game dev industry. For our 100th episode, we wanted to put it all together. In this video, we have 100 game development tips featuring learning sourced from our interviews and from game developers in the Ask Gamedev community. We've got devs from a variety of backgrounds, ranging from some with a few game jam games to those who have worked on games that have sold millions of copies. There's something here for everyone, including advice on art, engineering, production, marketing, game design, motivation, and more. We are Ask Gamedev, and these are 100 game development tips from the Ask Gamedev community.
A 100th episode special!
Welcome back. We make videos on how to elevate your game development and inspire others. If after watching this video you want to continue the game dev conversation, check the video description for a link to our Discord server. We're now making fresh Ask Gamedev content on all of the major social networks, so be sure to check us out there too. All right, let's get to the tips. Here to kick things off is the one and only Dan Edelman.
And the main advice I want to give to new developers starting out is you've probably heard this, that you should always be thinking about marketing from day one. But what that can be a little bit confusing. And what people mean by that is not that you should be shouting from the rooftops about what game you're going to be making and showing screenshots all along the way and posting videos all the time. But instead, the number one thing that you should consider in terms of marketing is what the game is. And as soon as you're starting to make the game and as the game is coming along, you really need to think about who your audience is. And the more you can make the game just perfect for that audience, the better it's going to be. Now, that's not to say that you should think of a good target audience and then design a game for them. Instead, what I would recommend you do is make the game that you want to make and then start to think about who else would like that game. And as you continue to develop the game, think more and more about fine-tuning the aspects of the game that's really going to make it special for that niche audience that you're going after. So think about that, and so by the time you release your game, you won't have to worry about, well, who's going to want to play this game, because you'll have known that from the beginning. Good luck.
Download Unity, download GameMaker, figure something out, make like a clone game. I think that's like really helpful to get going. First game I made was like a balloon fight clone. That's how everybody starts, right? Follow some tutorials and just make something, right? I wanted something that was like simple enough that I could get going on. And it's just like things colliding and a point meter, the score goes up and nothing else. And that's like a good place to start. Asteroids is also a really great thing because it's just like instantiating some projectiles, they move and your points go up when they hit things. And that's like the entire game. Just like starting slow and small with something like that, I think, is really valuable.
This applies to almost anything in production, from the game itself to major features and everything in between. Think about a prototype first, then work on iteration. Sometimes you get stuck on something for a while and then end up scrapping it later because it's not fun. Instead of wasting too much time on a super polished version of something, get a minimal viable product of not only your game, but also whatever big feature you want to add to your game. Do not overscope your game. Keep your scope small and try to set deadlines for yourself for every small thing you are working on. It will give you sense of accomplishment and progression. As an indie game developer, time and resources are a scarcity. Use every tool at your disposal. If you find a sizable amount of time in your pipeline will or has become doing repetitive tasks like recoloring, combining art, or renaming files, look for tools online that can automate them. Don't brute force the problem. If you can't find a tool that can do it for you and it looks to be a major long-term time sink, consider writing your own tool to do it. When you think you are about 90% done with your game, you are usually more akin to 50% finished. This is true surprisingly often.
Finish something first. Even if it's the tiniest little thing. Make something and bring it all the way through, all the way to fruition. And by that I mean it is something that is distributed, other people are playing it, and if you're going to sell it, sell it. Because even if you only do 1 copy or 0 copies or even whatever, there are things that you can only learn by making it all the way through that process. We really took it on the chin from our inexperience with launches and other issues. Well, part of that was because I wanted my first game to be this, what ended up being this enormous project. And so I had no experience to fall back on, to leverage in order to make it through some of the troublesome waters that comes with any launch. If you have a very tiny game where if you mess it up, it's not the end of your dream career. It gives you the ability to work through some of these things in a low pressure environment, as opposed to being, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and you're staring down the barrel.
Never walk alone. Many solo developers have insane skills and can work on all aspects of game design. Unfortunately, also many of them are still years away from getting something playable into the hands of their audience. Creating something on your own is hard, may take forever, and you can lose your drive and focus. But most importantly, your ivory tower opinion sucks more often than you think. Find people who will put it to the test and share the load with you. Should you ever plan special events for your game, i.e. holiday events or contests, always create them in advance before releasing your game. Establish branches in your repository to store the holiday events of your game as you complete and polish them. This is especially ideal if you are a solo dev, as it saves you the risk of unsuspecting catastrophes and a last-minute skirmish to fix all surprise bugs. Always ever vigilant. Start small, start strong. Complexity and beauty will come as you go, as long as you keep loving the process till the end.
Underscope your game. I think ideas are easy to come by, and I think you should prototype what you're making and then let that decide whether your idea has legs or not.
Front-load your unknowns. Every project has its uncertainties and gray areas, and those are notoriously difficult to budget time and effort for. Addressing these first helps put you in a position where you can more accurately gauge the shape, scope, and scale of your project. That doesn't mean that you have to come up with perfect solutions straight away. Prototyping, temp code, and quick hacks can also reduce uncertainty and let you move forward with certainty. Software development is iterative. Nothing is perfect on the first try. That is true for art, sound, music, and code. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to make things perfect at first, and don't feel bad if your first drafts aren't as good as you'd hoped. Here's a secret. Constant rework and refinement is part of the process. Rather than feel paralyzed by a blank page, just put something, anything, down. Use blocks or beeps or ugly code, then refine it later. 99% of the coolest stuff you see is not the first draft. The ability to identify and prevent scope creep is one of the most useful skills. We are all big dreamers, but having a successful product outweighs having a bloated, unfocused one. The ability to identify scope creep and properly maintain a backlog of it can change your dev life. After your product is completed, fun, and stable, you can then pull from the backlog and bring your more experimental and risky ideas to life. This practice also cuts down on crunch if done properly. Try to play as safe as you can, taking into consideration what you can afford. In the game I'm working on, there are a lot of cutscenes involving characters talking to each other. I decided to shoot my cutscenes from large distances while characters are talking, avoiding the need for facial animations. This allowed me to do some really interesting camera work and also showcase some beautiful environments. Think creative. Some of the best indie games achieved a lot with little resources.
So advice to new and aspiring developers, I would say just focus on starting something and finishing it. And do it as fast as you possibly can. If you've never made a game before, just pick an engine, pick a tool, make a really bare bones, simple game that you can make as fast as possible.
My tip is to work on projects you're very passionate about. This may seem obvious, but making a game is a very, very long process, and it's easy to underestimate how long it might take. As time progresses, it can be harder to stay devoted to your project unless you've got a lot of enthusiasm and passion for it. Can you see yourself working on this project a year later? 2 or 3 years later? It's a good thing to ask yourself. Learn to estimate timelines. It's a skill you learn through practice and by establishing a feedback loop. Estimate, measure, compare, learn, repeat. Plan realistically. If it's your first game ever, estimate the time you will need for the production and multiply it by 3. Game development takes long. In fact, every little step in the development could take much longer than you initially planned, and it's okay. Just be aware of this from the beginning and plan generously for each production stage. Very big and experienced companies still deal with it after decades in the industry and numerous releases. If it's your first game, start small. Work your way up to the big titles. I know it may be tempting to start on that idea for a 40-hour epic RPG you've had since you were a kid, but I promise you, if I'm being honest, your first game isn't going to be good. Start small and work your way up, and that 40-hour epic you've always wanted to make will be more defined than ever when you start making it. If you can't fit one of your ideas in one game, it is perfectly fine saving that feature in another game, possibly a sequel. Look at Star Fox 64. Roughly 30% of Star Fox 2's planned content made it. Star Fox Zero even has the walker mode from it. When starting out, don't think about it too much and just start. Your first few games will be a mess, but you can ever only make one first game, and the second one gets better, and the third one too. Oh, and make a game which you think you can finish in 1 week. It will last 2 months. The first step should always be a crude prototype to check if the actual gameplay loop is fun. Track analytics of your test users. Testers for indie studios typically don't give you enough data, or they may not be completely honest, so they don't hurt your feelings. Use tons of analytics tracking, like Unity Analytics, to get a really detailed idea of how the playthrough went. Learn how to create a solid gameplay loop. For example, if you're making an RPG, players should be able to do things other than fighting and walking around. Give players a break from the core mechanics of your game so that your game won't feel repetitive and stale so soon. Try to get visual feedback of people playing your game whilst it's under development. This will allow you to better identify what people find fun in your game and what they find frustrating. This then gives you the opportunity to tune gameplay and make an overall better game. A puzzle-solving game is built by adding rules to the player. A problem-solving game is built by adding rules to the world. If you work solo like me, don't hide your work. The way you, as the developer, see your game is very different than actual players. You need feedback for balance, game feel, fun factor, and without a team, your best bet is to release an early demo on itch.io. You can't fear criticism. You need to use it to make positive game design choices moving forward. This also helps you start building a community around your game. Limitations can often breed creativity. When you find yourself in a situation where a game engine or tool has limitations, it's not time to find a new engine. It's time for creative solutions. Great games were created on 32 KB cartridges, and art was limited to 8 bits. People use RPG Maker's engine for more interactive story games. Minecraft modders create full games. Within the limits of Warcraft 3's map editor spawned entire genres of games, like MOBAs and Hero Siege. You can do it too.
I also think it's important to design your project to your team and your team's skill sets, and not make a multiplayer game if you've never made a multiplayer game, or not make a 3D game if you're a 2D artist. You just make a 2D game. Those are cool too.
Never feel you can't. Learn when to feel you shouldn't. If you try to make an incredibly ambitious game your first time, you may fail. You may even come to no longer like the idea. Instead, make things that you know you can complete, each pushing your comfort zone a slight bit. In short, never get dragged by your ideas not working out. Remember that you may just not be ready to do the game justice. It is, when designing a game, not important to keep the genre of the game you're making. Disregarding the genre or conventions of it usually leads to more interesting design than if you decide to follow most of the design conventions. Often removing parts or adding others may lead to a drastically different experience, but at the same time, it could also be useful to forget about everything that genres dictate. Don't do your dream project until you look at it from a game designer's perspective. My advice: make your game such that, when you play it, you enjoy it yourself and want to play the next version of it or an update of it. If it's not fun for you, it will not be fun for others. Plan ahead. The more time you spend preparing prototypes and a clean game design document, the less time it will take to finish your game. By thinking of all outcomes in your head, you're more likely to find solutions rather than bump into unexpected problems. Always make games that you would like to play. It will help you improve your game mechanics and general design. Keep the tension of the game ebbing and flowing. Just like music and movies, good gameplay almost always keeps the player engaged with the tension and release cycle. In games where I lose my focus and interest, it usually comes down to one of two things: keeping tension up for longer periods than what is comfortable to deal with, or allowing the player too much downtime without enough tension to keep them into it. I think that dynamic difficulty should be a focus in many games going forward. Think in player feedback. For example, what happens when the player shoots a gun? Muzzle flash, VFX, particles, gunshot sound, screen shake, character plays, and animation. Changing these sort of things will greatly change what the gun feels like.
One of the biggest pieces of advice is how do you handle making mistakes is accept that it's part of the job, right? And that you're not a bad developer because you made a mistake. And the mark of a good developer is what do you learn from that mistake? On the design side, there's systems that I've shipped that looking back on, I would do very differently, right? Like our power system, we don't give you a lot of reasons to build up a bigger, more robust power infrastructure, even though we designed the system to support it, right? I probably would want to tune that differently. I'd want to have those opportunities that really incentivize you to build out the power structure. Those sort of lessons are the things that you get from playtesting, from being, in our case, a live game and seeing it in the hands of players, but it's also a question of prioritizing your time, right? We had a lot of systems that we needed to work on, and so we didn't always, I think, and in my case, I didn't always make the right call about where to direct attention with the limited amount of time that we had. Oh man, I didn't tune this the way that I really wish I had of. I'm a terrible designer right now. You see what worked and what didn't work and you learn from that, and when you have the chance to make adjustments or do similar systems in the future, you remember that and you draw from that experience.
Always build a proper design pyramid. At the peak is your vision. Beneath that is the high-level design, which describes the results of your work, how the player will feel, what core experience you'll create. The mid-level design is your list of systems and features, which, when put together, create an experience matching that of the high-level design. Lastly, low-level design are all the little problems you have to solve so that what you have in the mid-level can exist and function. A skill tree is pointless if all you get is +1 attack and defense here and there. Every skill must have impact. Make a design document. It's useful as a reference, especially if you're working in a group. It can change, but it can also help avoid scope creep. Participate in all the game jams you can to build a portfolio and learn new stuff. Can't afford to buy Photoshop or Illustrator? Don't worry, you can download an alternative of Adobe software. For a Photoshop alternative, you can get GIMP and Photopea. For Illustrator, you can get Inkscape. For pixel art, you can get Piskel. The alternative softwares I mentioned are totally free of cost. Write tests that play your game for you. It can be achieved easily with Unity Test Framework, and this will give you confidence to release stable game updates. This is extra useful for a solo developer, since you can focus on doing other things instead of playtesting every single build yourself. Feedback is very important, but don't be affected too much by it. When you start showing your game, a lot of people will express their opinion on things that they don't like or things that they would change. If you really like blue, you don't have to go with red if some people insist that it is better. Don't copy other games. Instead, pick different game mechanics from different games and combine them to create something new and exciting. Simple is key. Start with the key mechanics and features of your idea. This will give you ample time to decipher what you imagine for your game and if it functions properly. In Unity, if you have a lot of non-moving game objects in an area of your scene, be sure to check the static box in the Inspector tab of each object. This will help you increase your frame rate.
The number one piece of advice is learn to program. And even if you're really focused on game design, you're not interested in engineering, part of the nature of design in general, and technical design specifically, is recognizing that what you do as a designer is programming, right? Understanding the logic of how a rule set works and how you can set the parameters for the play experience, what the player can do, what they can't do, that's all what programming is. And so knowing programming is really just an incredibly powerful tool for you to express your design intention.
Always have the quality and clarity of your code in mind. Think deeply before you code, because it will save you a lot of energy and time. As more experienced developers are saying, the problem with the fast and dirty coding is that the dirt stays long after we forget the speed. Simply, as Valery Legasov said, every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid. It's the same situation with coding, and it's called technical debt. And eventually, it will bite you. If you are a Unity game developer, you could think about designing your code like this. 1. Use mono behaviors just as delegates, which delegate the heavy lifting to the small native C# solid classes. 2. Use scriptable objects to store values you will need across the whole game, or one or multiple scenes. 3. Put your heavy lifting code in small native C# solid classes. Learn to follow a well-defined coding convention and coding standards. Stick to them for the whole duration of the project. Do not change them. You'll thank yourself along the way. Technical debt is very real. Invest a bit of time into planning out your code and trying to run through scenarios before you start coding. This will help you see edge cases and think of solutions before you're locked into your already existing code. This will save you a lot more time than what you might think. While coding movement, use an input vector instead of setting speed when a button is pressed. If you want to be a game programmer, try to learn the most common game programming patterns like singletons, FSM, finite state machine, command pattern, flyweight pattern. And there are a lot of them that could be useful in your game dev path. Also, try to learn interfaces so you would have a better structure of your code. If some feature does not work as intended, even after multiple tries, don't give up. As frustrating as it is, ask why at each step of the process. Break things down into the small puzzle pieces that make the beautiful picture and question how they fit together. Keep your data and code separate. That way you can add more content without having to change or break the code. As a bonus, more people, including your community, can contribute to your game and be a part of it. Anything can be data, including item names and descriptions, rules, images, or NPC behavior. keep build times as low as possible. One of the best tips I have for developers is to keep turnaround times as low as possible. In Tiny Thor, we put a lot of effort in to keep the build times under 2 seconds. Besides that, we can hot reload all configuration and asset files. This helps the programmer to tweak values easier and fix bugs faster. Short build times encourage us to play around a lot with the systems, and whole new ideas evolve out of it as well.
A lot of that comes down to the silhouette. So you want to be able to recognize that character even if they're in different lighting, even if they're in a different art style. The horns are there just for that purpose, so that he's a recognizable silhouette. And just for the gameplay too, if you're just scanning the screen and you're like not super paying attention, it's very easy to find where he is. So I think that's half of making good character design, and the other half is making it simple, right? NES games are great at that because they're tiny and you can't see anything. So the details have to be big and bold and noticeable. That's why so many iconic character designs have like stayed from the NES era, is because just out of necessity you have to create a character that's like easily identifiable and simple and like easy to draw and small. That and having like a good lineup too. Especially with Shovel Knight, we wanted a diverse cast of bosses, from like really tiny ones to really huge ones that are imposing. Putting all that and planning it out ahead of time I think helps a lot. Like even before we finalize them all, we're like, what areas are they going to be in, and what color palettes are those areas going to be in? Are we sure we've got like a red villain and a blue one, and we're like hitting a lot of good zones and there's not overlap? Do they all have different personalities? Do they all have different silhouettes? Are they all like totally as unique from one another as they can possibly be, and have they been pushed as much in their direction as they can be? That's like really important to us when we're making any character. In Shovel Knight, the art is usually what's like bringing it all together though. They all have an imposing like idol pose. They all seem like bosses when you enter the boss room. And I think that, and just the pixel art and all the little things we do to make the art style match, I think pulls all that together, so that the Order of No Quarter is like a fitting crew and not just a bunch of weird misfits.
To make art assets for pixel art games, start by using ready-made palettes from Lowspec, for example. This seems like a small thing, but it truly makes a difference. Color is a hard thing to get right and takes a lot of experience. Many ready-made palettes take into account the base rules of color and are capable of transforming the look and feel of your pixel art game. If you really need to, you can always add colors to customize your game feel. Always treat your imported assets as though they're final. It will save you time in the long run, and who knows, they just might be. Never skip pre-production, especially when it comes to creating 3D assets or animation. If you are doing 3D art yourself, hire a professional concept artist and work out the designs with him or her. Even if you're a concept artist yourself, hire someone else to finalize the design. You will always be surprised by the other person's perspective, and this combination of visions will benefit your project. Don't cut corners with the music. Music is the soul of any game. It sets the tone and is one of those features that will certainly be remembered by your audience. Invest time into finding the right musician who understands your project and games in general. Work with this person or people to craft the proper soundtrack. If possible, commission music specifically for your trailer.
Any developer working with a publisher should have extremely high expectations, because you're literally giving them probably a decent chunk, of your revenue. Sometimes I see developers saying like, oh, well, I hope that they'll handle like social media and some community building. I hope they'll put out some press releases and some trailer stuff. That's the least they should be doing. That's the baseline. Like if a publisher is saying like, oh, we'll handle this and this, that seems a bit weird to me. They should be explaining the things they're going to be doing on top of that. We do a ton of stuff with Discord, running public betas through Discord, kind of pulling in Steam wish lists and stuff like that. We do a lot of stuff working directly with the platforms, kind of going to Xbox and PlayStation, Nintendo and Steam, taking the games direct to those people and building the relationships, making sure that when a developer's game comes out, the day it comes out, those platforms care. That's really important, because then they're just more inclined to shout about it and to spread the word, which is obviously going to lead to more sales. I think a big thing when a developer is talking to a publisher is that they should be asking, when the publisher says, yeah, we'll put out the press releases and stuff, the developer should be following up with, okay, but what else are you going to do? Because every other publisher is going to be doing that as well. So, yeah.
Marketing your game is more than just social media presence. You also need to establish networks with people in the video game industry and see how they can help you get your game out there. Attend conventions, participate in events, and make friends. You'll be surprised how much a single person can help you out. Share your process from the start. Start networking early. The earlier you start, the better you will get at it. Spend a lot of time thinking about ways you can better present yourself to others, whether it's friends, family, or potential customers/partners. Empathize with your contacts. If you're naturally an introvert, come out of your shell. Take small steps if needed. Practice public speaking and being interviewed. Reciprocate on social media when you can. Most importantly, be kind and helpful to others. You can distribute your game independently via your own custom launcher using PatchKit. Check it out at patchkit.net. Start marketing and building a following as soon as possible, posting updates across various socials of all stages of development.
Missed review opportunities. Even with overly generous amounts of time mapped out for platform certification, our schedule ended up being very tight between certification and release, and one platform was very slow getting review keys for us after we passed certification. So we missed out on some opportunities to get the game reviewed by some websites because they lost interest or were too busy with other things by the time we sent out the keys. So next time I'll be setting more time aside for unexpected delays from the platform developers.
My advice for indie developers is, don't wait until your game is finished and then start marketing. It's hard to get people interested in your game, so start marketing your game as soon as possible. When you start completely fresh with a new game idea, always build your store page right away. You don't have to set it live, but defining your USP and thinking about how you're going to sell and market your game is key. And something about that should be considered before the very first design draft. Get as much feedback as possible from people playing your game. It isn't easy, but try to get people to play your game, demo, prototype early and often. For some reason, there seems to be this urge to keep everything a big secret, hoping to surprise and wow people. That often leads to frustration when people don't get it or understand it like we, the developer, does. Let feedback guide you to give the player what they want. As a small indie, it's essential to start showing off your game early on social media, Imgur, Reddit, even if it's only work in progress. Make the game GIFable and post GIFs that show mechanics, art style, or what makes it remarkable, and do it often. Gather feedback and publish store pages ASAP to start collecting wish lists. Don't wait until everything is polished and perfect. Make sure to have a Discord ready to build your community and get the people involved in the development.
I think a big thing for me that has really helped in selling games is having games that are doing something different. People like different and weird, and people like funny as well. So you'll see in a lot of the games we do in No More Robots now, they're all very easy to describe because they're just different from everything else. You know, we've got like Hypnospace Outlaw is this 90s internet simulator. You say 90s internet simulator and a lot of people now know which game you're talking about. We've got this downhill mountain biking game, which isn't weird, but it's different. There are no other downhill mountain biking games right now. We've got an anti-Brexit simulator, which, you know, like, again, like, what other game is that? And it's weird and it's funny, and that's pretty much like the basis of my whole publishing label, is that all the games we bring on are just weird in some way and make people kind of take note of them.
Write the end, the middle, and the beginning of your game first. Then fill out the blanks. It's easier to manage how the game progresses with the main plot points in mind. I don't see enough indie devs make lore books. It's always nice to create a lore book for your game. Whether you use it or not, at least you have one spot to store all the information about your world. If you're making a narrative-focused game, think of an ending right away. Don't assume that you'll get there eventually. Underwhelming endings ruin the whole experience for many people. Game development is both a fun and challenging journey. Take your time, enjoy the ride, and make sure to recognize burnout. You never want to get to the point where you no longer enjoy it. It's easy to spend all your time in development. Don't forget about the world around you too. Don't compare your games to others. You can trust your vision and believe in what you're making. Remember that video games are subjective. HD art and sound won't save a bad game. Realize that there are mainly two phases in which you are constantly moving back and forth: planning and implementation. In small studios, the planner, game designer, production manager, etc., usually also takes on executive roles: programmer, graphic designer, etc. If you are not sure which mode you are in, you switch back and forth too often and get quickly caught up in details. So you waste endless amounts of time and your productivity drops dramatically. When we made our first game, we were hesitant to publish it because we felt it was not perfect. But I would suggest to every new developer to just publish their first project, because the feeling of sharing it to your friends and the game genuinely working is just amazing, and it gives you more confidence for your next projects. Don't neglect regular polishing. A feature that might already go into a good direction can sometimes not feel good without a basic polishing round. Effects, sounds, particles, screen shake, use the whole arsenal. Never be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes the project you have in mind can be really awesome, but also really daunting. And sometimes you can't do everything yourself. Asking for help from others or even using asset packs can be a good way to speed up development and avoid moral drops from slow progress or doing a job you don't like or have trouble with. When you start as a game developer, there's only one thing you should know, and that is, don't try to make a masterpiece, but try to make something. I mean, your first game doesn't have to be a big hit. It should be your game. Relearn what you already know as often as you can. When we pick up a new skill, we tend to learn the subject just enough to be able to survive before we jump into our first project. This is a good approach, but it is as important to go back to the fundamentals with your newfound hands-on experience, or you'll always be stuck on your current level. Already developing your game for a couple of months? Go reread your engine's documentation today. I'll promise a whole new world will open up to you. When you get stuck and burned out, close everything down and go do something else completely. Sometimes you won't have the luxury to do so, but things usually aren't as urgent as you think they are. This might cost you a few days of work, but by going out into the world and taking this break, you could save weeks or even months of working hard without advancing, and maybe even going the wrong direction entirely. Passion is key to finishing your game for many reasons. Game dev is the most strenuous job one can do from both a mental and physical state, so you need as much passion as possible or you will likely abandon the project. Passion also helps with things like discipline, which is super important as well. So if you want to finish any decent-sized game, then pick something you love. I have 4 gigs of RAM and a Celeron N4100, but that is not a reason to stop game development, because game dev will be the one to help you rise up. Start by making 2D games or simple 3D games, then use ads to earn money and get better gadgets. Having a potato PC is not a reason to stop game dev. Think small, go step by step. There will be times where you think you don't make any progress, but the final game will not be done in a single night, not even in a week or month. You just have to work each day on your game, even if you're just making little changes or some refactoring. Each little bit you work on your code or the art for your game improves yourself, and you will get closer to a finished game. Indie Game Dev. It's all about your own engagement. So I want to say, don't be afraid of failings or bad reviews. I know it stays when someone says something bad about your game, but just know it's not always about you. Maybe the game is just completely not for the guy who reviewed it. And anyways, one review doesn't really mean anything if you really like your game. The best you can do then is just enjoy it and be proud of yourself. So my tip is don't give up. Fails are always moving you forward. Start with smaller projects and learn by doing. But if you reached a point where you feel comfortable and got an idea for a game for that you have a real passion, never quit, even if everybody says you won't make it. Believe in you. Give yourself deadlines. It's a great way to force you to be better organized and progress in your development process. This advice applies to pretty much everything you're involved with. A tip that every beginner should keep in mind, but that even more experienced developers should remember every now and then, start small and keep it simple. Don't start with something too big. Start from the tiny little pieces you can handle and build your way up. When you feel that creating games is exhausting, hard, takes too long, and all odds are against you, remember us, a 2-person team in Cuba that have been the last 3 years working part-time jobs of $2 a day with 30 hours of dial-up internet a month, 0.05 megabits per second, blocked access to Unity, Photoshop, Steam, and any type of online banking, just to develop our first international game. If I had only one tip, it would be persistence, because everything else you do depends on it. Endeavor to learn a bit of everything. Having even a basic understanding of programming, graphic and UX design, sound design, music, even marketing can be a huge boon for any developer. Not only are you capable of doing simple tasks for quicker iteration cycles, you have an understanding of the language those artists use and can better communicate your needs to them. Game dev is hard, and solo game dev is extra hard. Try to find someone you can share your game dev journey with so you don't need to do all the programming, art, sound, and music yourself. If you find the right partners, you can bounce ideas off each other and your game will be even better. If you decide to go it alone, remember that work-life balance is important and taking a break isn't a bad thing. Do a little each day if you can, even if it's just thinking about a new design or content. Talk about your game journey even to people you know who might not get it. People often don't do this because it can be hard to handle. But not only is it insightful, I've seen people get office spaces, loans, artists, programmers, and just about anything come out from talking to friends or family who don't necessarily understand game development at all.
The game development community is very open, and in my experience, most people, if you just like cold email them, and most people have Twitters or emails and everything, they'll respond. I kind of stayed in isolation for a very long time, and as a result, I made a lot of mistakes that I didn't have to make if I had been talking to other people about it and, posing some of these questions.
Thanks for watching. For more Ask Gamedev, check out this video on solo game developer tips or this video on game design tips.